One of my ancestors was famous English King Edward III, but I don't have a title. That was until the good people at Established Titles reached out. Established Titles is a project based on an historic Scottish custom where landowners are referred to as lairds, or lords and ladies in English. Purchasing as little as 1 square foot of dedicated land on the private noble estate at Edelston, Scotland, makes you a lord or lady. You will receive a unique plot number and a lovely certificate, and Established Titles also plants 1 tree with every order, and work with global charities One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future to support global reforestation efforts. You could officially change your name to Lord or Lady and get it on your credit card, plane ticket, and so on. You can even get it on your dating profiles. It makes an amazing last-minute gift. Established Titles is now running an early Black Friday sale. Plus, if you use the code MarkFelton, you get an additional 10% off. Go to establishedtitles.com/MarkFelton to get your gifts now and help support the channel. Soviet T-34 tanks had seen very extensive combat use in Berlin in April to May 1945, as Red Army surrounded and then conquered Hitler's capital city. When the German garrison finally surrendered on the 2nd of May, Soviet forces began occupation duties that would not end until 1994. Berlin became a divided city split into 4 Allied occupation zones: British, American, French and Soviet, and the T-34s and other Soviet tanks remained in the Soviet zone, there to be unleashed one more time upon Berliners when trouble broke out in the socialist paradise of East Germany in 1953. Once more, the old T-34s rolled into action on Berlin's streets, not to fight Panzerfaust-armed Nazi fanatics and German Home Guards, but to attack unarmed civilians, objecting to the iron rule of communism that had been imposed upon them since 1945. East Germany had been created by the Soviets out of its occupation zone in 1949, a communist puppet state nominally ruled by Germans who answered in most matters to Moscow. Incredibly, in May 1952, Stalin had offered the West a plan to unify East Germany with the democratic West German Republic, but the West had rejected the idea, largely out of suspicion. The East German leader, Walter Ulbricht, now decided to accelerate the socialization of East Germany, involving removing the last vestiges of private ownership, accelerated industrialization, attacks on religion, and forced collectivization of agriculture. These policies created a lower standard of living for East Germans, with a cost of living crisis. 40% of wealthier farmers decamped to West Germany. Food riots occurred as shortages followed. Electricity and heating supplies were interrupted in cities, and industrial unrest and sabotage occurred. Ulbricht's response was to increase work quotas by 10%, but keep the workers on the same wages. People left. Indeed, hundreds of thousands of East Germans voted with their feet and fled to the West. Stalin died unexpectedly in March 1953, and the new Soviet government became concerned at how East Germany was deteriorating. It basically rubbished Ulbricht's plans. The boot was to be removed from the East Germans' neck, and consumer goods produced. Forced collectivization ended, and attacks on religion also stopped. But the work quotas remained. The East German authorities looked weak in front of those they ruled. This emboldened some East Germans to demand change, the focus being the hated work quotas. The first protest occurred on the 12th of June 1953, when 5,000 workers demonstrated in Brandenburg an der Havel. 3 days later, a workers' delegation went to see East German Prime Minister Otto Grotewohl, demanding that the work quotas be revoked. Grotewohl ignored them. And starting at 9 a.m. on the 16th of June, workers began to strike in East Berlin and to march on the Free German Trade Unions Federation headquarters building, demanding the old work quotas back. But soon the demands moved beyond work quotas to other aspects of state control and repression. Demonstrators also converged on the East German government on Leipziger Strasse and the SED, the Socialist Unity Party of Germany, the only authorized political party in the country. The crowd in front of the East German House of Ministries building, which was in fact the former Nazi Ministry of Aviation, demanded that Ulbricht and Grotewall address them. This didn't happen. In Moscow, the decision was taken to make the work quota increases voluntary, but by now the workers' grievances were much wider. There were some clashes with the Volkspolizei, the East German armed police, but the workers did partially disperse. Moscow was very worried. The communist puppet regime in East Germany appeared to be under threat. In the evening, the Soviets decided to deploy troops on the streets of East Berlin. Among the ordinary people in East Germany, the Soviets were not popular, particularly in East Berlin, where memories of what had happened in 1945 were still very fresh. By the 17th of June, workers were calling for free elections. They wanted the Ulbricht government to resign and Western-style liberties be permitted. As the crowds grew in size, so did the people's confidence and defiance. By 9 a.m., 25,000 were gathered in front of the House of Ministries, with tens of thousands more in the streets and the Potsdamer Platz. Then, between 10 and 11 a.m., up to 100 demonstrators stormed the government building, overwhelming police and Stasi secret police officers. At this point, the Soviets struck. Russian tanks and troops attacked and, in an hour, cleared the demonstrators around the government headquarters. The border with West Berlin was sealed and martial law declared. 2 Soviet tank divisions were used, with some 30,000 Red Army and East German troops battling protesters. Tanks opened fire on protesters outside police headquarters. For the rest of the afternoon and evening, there were running battles between the Soviet army and East German workers, including tanks and troops firing directly into crowds of people. A wave of arrests followed, arrests that also included some Soviet troops who refused to open fire on unarmed protesters. Around 40 demonstrators were killed and hundreds, perhaps even thousands, injured, plus another 40 or so executed after being arrested, among the 20,000 rounded up. East Berlin was once more under direct Red Army control. The protests spread, however, throughout East Germany. 129 demonstrations took place outside East Berlin and 332 factories went on strike. By the 24th of June, the protests calmed down. East Germans were very angry that their own police had fired at demonstrators. Support and membership of the SED fell dramatically. Many workers also refused to pay their trade unions' dues. Ulbricht survived, backed by Soviet military power, and Moscow drove through some economic reforms to attempt to mollify the East Germans. Another outcome was the decision by the USSR to free tens of thousands of World War II German POWs still held in labor camps in the Soviet Union and allow them finally to go home. Another outcome of the rising was increased state surveillance of workers. But East Germans continued to vote with their feet until, in 1961, the authorities constructed the Berlin Wall to stop the drain of people leaving for the free West. Many thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon, details in the description box below.